Patch 2.6 did not bring us any balance changes, but it's allowing Legends of Runeterra another few weeks for the meta to settle. The huge amount of balance changes in patch 2.5 meant loads of new decks started popping up, and all favourites were brought back to the meta as well. Now that we've had enough time for the meta to settle, today we're going to have a look at the best new decks that were brought back to the meta in patch 2.5 balance changes. So for each deck I'm also going to look at why they're back in the patch 2.6 meta as well. So this is Best New Decks Patch 2.6. This video has been done in collaboration with BomberTV. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on the bell notifications too. So let's dive in. This is Midrange Frostbite, and the deck features cards primarily from Freljord with some support from Noxus too. Interestingly, many of the key cards from this deck are from Noxus. The deck has a typical ramp to mid-game with lots of 3 or 4 mana costing cards, like most Midrange decks, and it's quite an expensive one with 5 epic cards in total. The idea behind Midrange Frostbite is to level up Ashe as fast as possible, and after you do that, freeze your opponent's board, making them unable to block and go for the win. This is also a bit of a recurring theme in the cards that have 5 or more power in this deck, and I'm going to go onto this later on. To achieve the Ashe level up win condition, we have lots of cards with freeze abilities like Ice Veil Archer and Harsh Winds. Ice Veil Archer frostbites an enemy on play, and Harsh Winds is a burst spell that frostbites 2 enemies. Nice and simple. You can take advantage of the frostbite mechanic when you attack with our glass cannon unit, Trafarian Glory Seeker, making value trades and protecting them from certain death. So this card obviously has Challenger, it's 5 power, 1 health, but can't block unfortunately. This follower has obviously the potential to do some very heavy damage. As she has Challenger, she can simply challenge the frostbitten units and quickly take them out without worrying about them doing any damage back to her. So a very nice synergy here. We also have more synergies to control the board against aggro with cards like the Reckoning or Culling Strike, which could be useful to kill bigger targets, especially with the help from Frostbite. The Reckoning kills all units with 4 less power if you control an ally with 5 plus power. Most of your deck has units with 5 or more power, so you're going to really easily reach this criteria. Culling Strike kills a unit with 3 or less power. So obviously any unit that has Frostbite is going to have 0 power temporarily, so basically meaning these cards can easily wipe them out regardless of what their original power actually was. Overall, this is a very flexible deck indeed, and it can play for aggressive, value, and even some control, and it's all tied together by the unique mechanic of Frostbite. You're going to have a lot of fun here. Midrange Frostbite was actually one of the best decks in the game for a while, so we're looking pre-Targon and Shurima era here, but it fell out of fashion a bit. But it never was a bad deck in theory, it just didn't become the trendy deck to play anymore. And it's starting to get back to the top now where it was, so it's nice to see it present and viable again, especially as it's not been around for a while. Midrange Frostbite saw a bit of a resurgence, maybe because of the lack of proper control decks except for Lissandra Control, which, let's say most of the time is probably going to be a fair matchup. The fact it gives us space for more mid-range decks, and Frostbite Midrange has kind of always been the best mid-range deck of them, so that is naturally why this one pops up. As you may have seen at the start of this section, the Shurima expansion variation of this deck features LeBlanc and Whispered Words, so this is the new variation of this archetype, so I'll be interested to see how long this stays around for. This is Lissandra Trundle, and it features cards primarily from the Freljord region, but with lots of support from the Shadow Isles too. It's a typical control deck with lots of high costing cards, 8 cards costing 7 plus mana in total. It's a fairly expensive deck featuring 5 epic cards, and it's actually quite a spell heavy one too with 22 spells. The idea of this deck is to win with a Watcher generated from Lissandra after she levels up. To do that we obviously need to level up Lissandra, and obviously she levels up when you've summoned 2 plus allies that cost 8 plus. So when she does level up, she summons a Watcher in the hand. Nice and simple. Trundle is therefore her best friend, as he generates an 8 plus mana unit, which is essentially free, and it repays itself immediately, so it's obviously his big ice pillar. And this gives you a free activation towards the level up of Lissandra. Another way of leveling up is Spectral Matron, so which is probably being seen for the first time ever in a competitive sense. And the reason why she's so good is not only she's an 8 plus cost card herself, but she can also summon a unit that costs 8 mana as well with her effect, who creates an ephemeral version of an ally in the hand to summon it. This will immediately level up Lissandra, keeping the 8+ cost unit in the hand, so you can obviously play it later on the next turn, which will basically give you so easily the 8+ mana costing cards that the Watcher needs to basically make it a free unit. So obviously it's got a high mana cost. If you do this, it gets to 0. So this is basically the combo, and after you cheat out a Watcher with Spectral Matron, which will discount the Watcher in the hand to 0 costing mana as well, you can basically have 2 Watchers in play, nuking your opponent's enemy's deck twice, and attacking with 20+ damage. Your opponent is going to be dead, I have no kind of doubt about that. With that said, you should be able to survive to late game to do this on the 8th turn that you obviously need to be aiming for, but it's the trickiest part of this deck. But luckily these are the 2 best regions for control. So you've got AoEs such as Avalanche, healing cards like Rivering Whale, and removals like Vengeance. So overall this is a very interesting deck. It's pretty bland in early game, but late game you're going to be having a lot of fun. In my previous videos, a lot of you were asking why had I not covered this earlier, and the answer for that is simply that top tier players are having a lot of success with this deck, but it seems a lot harder for the kind of amateur players, your beginner level players. They're trying it out and it's just dropping the win rate down as they're not fully understanding how the deck works. For that reason, it's why we're seeing the stats for this deck outside of our top 10 decks. Obviously that's a previous video we did on this channel, but if you understand it, hopefully this video helps, then you're going to have a lot more success. So please check out BomberTV's if you want even more detail on how this video works, and you should see that in the card in the top right above. Midrange Frostbite saw a bit of a resurgence, maybe because of the lack of proper control decks except for Lissandra Control, which, let's say most of the time, is probably going to be a fair matchup. The fact it gives us space for more mid-range decks, and Frostbite Midrange has kind of always been the best mid-range deck of them, so that is naturally why this one's popped up. As you may have seen at the start of this section, the Shroomer expansion variation of this deck features LeBlanc and Whispered Words, so this is the new variation of this archetype, so I'll be interested to see how long this stays around for. This version of Burn Aggro is a new quotation marks deck from the latest expansion, and is a variation of the archetype that was popular several months ago. The new cards just made it that little bit stronger, and we're yet to have a meta where Burn is dominating. It features cards from Noxus and Piltover and Zorn like before, and has Draven and Teemo in the deck. It's extremely cheap with 29 commons and no epics. This archetype is probably the simplest concept ever. To win the game you must reduce the health of your opponent's Nexus from 20 to 0 as quickly as possible, and this deck does exactly that, and it does it fast as well. Start your game very aggressively. It's crucial to have a nice curve with particular care for 1-drops, even if it means you are more attacking. You should take every opportunity to deal cheap damage to your opponent's Nexus, so attack with cards with attack effects which burn, even if these cards die in the process. So I'm talking about Legion Saboteur and Boom Crew Rookie here right at the beginning, which can help start your basically very aggressive start to the game. In a mirror game, or against a board-centric decks, try to use Used Car Salesman on the defensive turn. Summoning 3 units basically mean you're blocking their whole attack, giving you more time to burn them out later on. Don't keep your burn spells in your mulligan, as you will naturally draw into them, and use them to close the game as fast as possible. So this applies to all your burn spells, including your cheapest ones like Mystic Shot, right up to Decimate. This deck includes Ballistic Bot and Aftershock from the latest expansion. Ballistic Bot generates an ignition every round which deals 1 damage to the opposing Nexus, and Aftershock deals 3 to anything or destroys a landmark. In this deck, use Aftershock to damage the opponent's Nexus. This deck first appeared in patch 2.16, so absolutely ages ago, and it's probably a deck that is in the meta simply because it requires less skill to be played than the Spider Aggro deck. And the kind of simplicity often leads to a faster game. It also makes it more friendly with beginners. It's a fairly budget deck, and this is probably why it's being used before players advance to Spider Aggro when they want something a little bit more complicated. This is Spider Aggro and features a nice 50-50 mix of Noxus and Shadow Isles. The deck is very follower heavy, featuring 28 followers in total and only 9 spells. If you look at the mana cost split in the bottom left, you will see that a mad amount of cards cost 3 or less mana. The only cards costing 3 or more is the 3 copies of Decimate that cost 5 mana. It's a very budget deck with 0 epics and 27 commons, making it great for beginners too. This deck is the essence of aggro. You want to deal as much damage as possible with the first 2 attacks of the game, as essentially your curve ends at 3 mana. This means against control decks you want to develop as much as possible without risking too much from the AoE, even though sometimes you've got to take the risk. But if they have a board clear, then good luck, but all decks have a counter. Legion Rearguard with 3 damage and Precious Pet with 2 damage, and a Fearsome, meaning that very few early game cards can actually block it, can help your very aggressive turns on 1 and 2, so you're going to be doing a lot of damage here. You can deal an insane amount of damage very early. For example, on turn 1 you can summon a Legion Saboteur for 3 damage. Turn 2 you summon a House Spider, who in turn summons a Spiderling 2 for an additional damage. And turn 3 you summon a Frenzied Skitterer for 11 damage in total, setting your opponent at 6 health by turn 3, so your games could be incredibly short if everything goes in favour here. Later on you can easily burn your opponents from low amounts of health with burn spells like Decimate, and burn units like Doombeast. Decimate simply deals 4 damage to your opponent's Nexus, and Doombeast drains 2 from your opponent's Nexus when summoned with Nightfall. So it's not only burns your opponent, but can also help keep your Nexus healthy, because obviously you're going to be playing very aggressively, you need to survive as well. Stalking Shadow is a particularly strong card for the burn purposes, as effectively you can double your burn potential from units like Doombeast, or simply copy cheap units to go very wide very effectively. For example, copy a Stygian Onlooker, who gains 2 damage and Fearsome on Nightfall, so this is a great unit for quick, easy 4 damage. I'm personally very happy to see Spider Aggro finally return to the meta in this form, but obviously it's got some new cards in it as well that make it a completely new deck, so I simply can't believe it's at the top. I probably feel like this is just because the meta is still settling, and obviously aggro decks typically do very well in new metas at the beginning, but it's nice to see it here, and this is the best one that's currently around in this patch. To counter this deck, any AoE is a solid option, as the deck wants to go wide with spiders, who typically have very low health. If you also have heal focus cards, then this is even better, as you can counter their second win condition, which is burning. For that purpose, Lissandra Control is the best current deck at answering any spider aggro you may be seeing, as it has both of these things, which obviously features AoE in the forms of cards like Avalanche, and heal in the form of cards like Withering Wail. Spider aggro keeps being very solid, despite the huge counters that exist, like decks such as Lissandra Control. We see that other decks are continuing to try and counter these as bait, for example Azir Lucian, which in basically just a few turns gets beaten by Spider aggro, so it's basically creating a bit of a kind of rock, paper, scissors in the meta, which, to be honest, is a very healthy way for the meta to be. And there we go guys, what do you think is the best new deck that popped up in patch 2.5? I personally love the meta, as it's feeling quite refreshed right now, and I hope patch 2.6 continues this theme as the meta continues to settle. What do you think is the best deck in patch 2.6? I would love to hear in the comments. Up next is Top 10 Decks patch 2.6, taking a look at a wide range of decks with the best rune rates in the current patch. The data presented here is analysed by BomberTV using MOBA Analytics. He's a Masters tier player with a background in game theory and game design. He took the most winning archetypes into Master tier, excluding ones with small play rates, analysed their key properties on why they are so strong. Link to his channel is in a pinned comment and in the card above. I've recently set up an Instagram account, @LoreGuides, and I'll be doing a giveaway shortly. Please follow this account for see posts about new videos, and will be in a chance of winning this giveaway. Please remember to like and subscribe, and turn on bell notifications too. See you next time guys.